So thank you so much, everyone. Good morning for joining us today to celebrate our senior graduating students in Latin American Caribbean Studies who are going to present their honors thesis project in our concentration. So just for everyone to know how it works to complete an honors thesis in our concentration. So we have like two different formats. One of them is like a traditional honors thesis, like deeply based on original research. And then we have another possible format, which is a creative project accompanied by a reflective statement in which students present somehow the relevance of their project for the field of Latin American Caribbean studies, but in addition, they also provide a creative project. This can be a film, can be an opera, can be a course, can be a blog. So every year we have a variety of projects that either are completely creative or are, let's say, more research related, although the creative projects also imply a big portion of research that students conduct progressively over the fourth year of their college studies here at Brown. So unfortunately, this year, given the current situation, we cannot physically attend this event. This one is one of the somehow nicest events that we hold in our center every year in May before commencement. And it's like the first ceremony to celebrate the success of our students. But we are doing our best, and then I would like, in fact, to congratulate our students here. We just have 4 of them today. Danielle Jason, who is class 19.5, is a junior 0.5er, I mean, I'm a senior. And then Laura Muñoz, Ella Satish, and Elisabeth Schifrin. There are also 2 additional honors thesis authors, Lou Epstein, who already participated in this presentation last year as a junior 0.5er, and Jackson Sales, who will not be presenting today. So today we have only 4 presentations. So thank you to all of you and to our students. They were able to complete their thesis in difficult conditions, far from their advisors, without access to the library, and without their friends on campus, but close to their families in some cases. The way in which we're going to proceed is that they will present following an alphabetical order. So it's Danielle, Laura, Ella, and Elisabeth, 10 minutes each of them. And at the end of all the presentation, we will have a Q&A. So please feel free, and I really encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A. You can see the little icon at the bottom of the Zoom video. And Kate Goldman, our fantastic center manager at CLACS, will progressively collect the questions and then present the questions, so our students will be able to answer them at the end of their presentations. If you want, you can either choose the speaker view on top of the Zoom video, either speaker view or gallery view. So you can see either the speaker mainly or the entire group of attendees today. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kate, for making this event possible. Ailton, our interim director, and Patsy Lewis, and also John Matza and Ellen White from the Watson Institute for all the technical support. Now, I will quickly introduce Danielle. and then also the title of his honors thesis. So Daniel Jason is a senior concentrating in history and Latin American Caribbean studies, focusing on education and literature. As a passionate of Cono Sureño, fueled by time with his grandparents and listening to Chilean rock and roll, he brings his fervor for Latin American culture and education to classrooms whenever he can. His experience as an industrial design assistant at the School of Professional Studies, in which he reviews and helps design online courses, and as an education consultant for various schools around the country, always draws back to his love of learning Latin American history. During his spare time, you can find him playing the Cajun at various outings, participating in food drives for Food Not Bombs Providence, which aims to provide food for the homeless, and listening to more Chilean rock and roll. So I'm happy now to introduce Daniel's presentation of his honors thesis, Teaching Latin America, a Reflective Experience. The thesis has been supervised by Professor Daniel Rodriguez as the primary advisor. I am the second reader. Thanks, Daniel. You are one of our most faithful primary advisors. Everyone wants to work with you. It's really great to have you among our group of instructors that allow students to conduct their research. Thanks a lot. Daniel.
Hello, everybody. Everyone hopefully can hear me all right. Let me start up my presentation up here. All right. Erica, we're all good? It looks good? All righty. So hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Jason, and I did one of the creative theses on, basically I made a class, and I taught that class at a high school. And this is my thesis, Teaching Latin America, a Reflective Experience. And so we're gonna go through how I came up with the idea and the people that helped me along the way and how it turned out. So the inspiration for this project came up a long time ago when I was in the School of Professional Studies, or now called the Digital Learning and Design Lab. And I pretty much decided, with my love of education and learning, I wanted to make my own course on Latin America. And this had always been in the back of my mind since I was in high school, when I noticed that in my own high school, we didn't really cover a lot of Latin American history nor Latin American culture. And I wanted to, and while I was super interested in that, I didn't have too many chances to go and explore that aspect of my identity. So I figured that I would try to give back and make a course that was more in tune to Latin American history, and basically history that's not covered in the normal high school curriculum. My also love of learning started with MOOCs, or massive open online courses that were available to everyone on the internet. And I decided I wanted to make something that was accessible to people, and that could be basically a curriculum that could be used over and over again. So that's where the idea was born. And also Erica and Professor Rodriguez gave me the chance to do this, so good for me. the ball started rolling. But of course, there's logistics that we have to do to make this happen. So first I had to find a school that would let me teach a class. So I stumbled upon Blackstone Academy Charter School in Pawtucket, which wasn't too far away. It was just a bus ride away. And the director there, her name is Kathleen. She was very receptive to this idea for me teaching a summer class there, and we discussed back and forth as to what we would do and things that would happen. And we decided that after a while, I would teach a full high school summer course that would count as a social studies credit for students that needed a leg up in the just to either catch up on credits, or who just wanted to get ahead. So that was part one. Part two is actually designing the class, which I have to say I learned a lot. And I'm so thankful for all my teachers that helped me along the way with this part. And now I understand what it is to make a class. And like, it was not an easy process. And there were a lot of things that I had to take into consideration with, with mainly Professor Rodriguez, who helped me out with this, as to what kind of activities, what kind of subjects to cover, how different types of debates, different, how to do research and how research can be applied to high school students. I was also thankful for the Choices program at Brown, that basically they make like just outlines of different lesson plans that can be used in high school settings and different debates that we used. So it's like these kinds of just logistical things that kind of got in the way at first. But the actual ideas that came up with the course, were things that I found that would appeal to the high school student, and then we would backtrack and see and then see the history behind it. So the ideas that were knocked around at the beginning were like dictators, Latin American dictators. We talked about narco-corridos because a big population of the school is familiar with that sort of thing. There's a significant Mexican population. The gangs of El Salvador and MS-13. And at the end of the whole, at the whole course, we talked about what it means to be Latino in the United States today. What does that life entail? What representation? What culture? How can you be American and from Latin America both at the same time? So basically, I wanted to use ideas and subjects that students were familiar with in the present, and then look at how that pertains to history in the past, and to see the systems and processes and just patterns that happen. So the actual class, when I got to my class, of course, I was really nervous and I didn't know what I was doing. And it took me a week, we'll say a week, to get into the groove of things. And at the beginning, I kind of identified a couple things. So I took the first week and we went real slow. And basically, I went through like how to research, how to take notes, how to use the library, how to conduct an OPVL, which we use for identifying documents, their origin, purpose, value, and limitation. And things were going well until, a lot of students came up to me and said, we still having trouble keeping up and taking notes. So what I did is I set aside a whole other day, and we went and we basically practiced taking notes, practiced doing OPVLs, practiced writing, just to make sure everyone was up to speed. And I realized at that moment that, as much as I had all the planning in the world, I had these, in my thesis, I have the appendix, which is a huge, basically, archive of all my notes that I took. And I realized that, as much preparation as I had, I still had to be flexible. I still had to change and move different aspects of my class around. Fortunately, we got through all the material and I adapted. But it was quite a struggle, and I realized just how fluid a class has to be effective. But I will say that my class, in my opinion, paid off. I learned a lot from teaching this class. First of all, the connections I made with students, and being there for 6 weeks in the summer was amazing. We all they taught me as much as I taught them, I think. And just to see the lighting up in their eyes, and when their history was being identified, like I had people from Mexico, from the Dominican Republic, from Honduras, from Colombia, and whenever we brought up their, that aspect of history, of how their history connected to history today and what's going on today, you know, each of them had their own like opinions and ideas that they wanted to put out there. And just to see that sort of involvement in high school students that, you know, may have been like disillusioned with the normal history class was fantastic. Like I had one student, a student from Honduras, who was very quiet, didn't talk a lot at the beginning, but when we talked about MS-13 and, you know, gang violence in Central America, you know, she became one of the star students in the class. She was talking. She decided to do her final paper on Honduras and the president there. And, you know, while everyone was still on page like 1 or 2, she was on page 5 because she just had that much to say. And like, I just realized giving a platform to those students who, you know, maybe did not have that platform in a normal class was, you know, just brought out the best. I also, so with this, I took out a lot. I also hope that I left an impression on students and the process. I delivered my my thesis to my to Blackstone, which means that now they can teach it again if they so like. And it was just a great experience, and I'm grateful that I was able to do it. I'm grateful for all the help, whether it's Kylene or whether it's the School of Professional Studies or, you know, Erica and Professor Rodriguez, who pushed me, even though sometimes it was hard and we had to scrap a bunch of thesis material, but made it in the end. I'm just grateful that it all happened together and that, you know, even if I did, you know, just help that one student, that it happened. And yeah, that's kind of it. I'm just happy that it all got together in the end and that things happen, even though it wasn't always expected.
Great, Daniel. Thank you so much. So we are happy to, since we are not all together in the same location. I mean, please feel free to share your enthusiasm at the end of the presentations. You can clap. You can, you know, you can definitely show your appreciation for the students' work. Also, we'll have the time after with the questions and at the end for a collective like recognition of the work. So thank you so much, Danielle, for presenting this creative project and showing how the fact of designing a course is not only like a challenging like skill, but it's also a moment in which we are building, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, something for others, for students. And I would also emphasize the important like component of community engagement in Daniel's work, the way in which he has been serving the community basically by offering not only once like this course, but also like give the possibility to other teachers to continue to use the materials that you have prepared and all the reflection that you have shared upon like how challenging it is to teach Latin American modern history in high schools in the US and to like Latinx population. Right? I'm sure Daniel Rodriguez afterwards and other friends and colleagues will also ask you more about this experience. In the meantime, I would like to now introduce Laura Muñoz. We will move now to Cuba, to Miami and Cuba, to hear Laura's presentation. So Laura is a senior double concentrating in Latin American and Caribbean studies and history as Danielle. And she was born in Cuba and raised in Miami and grew up in a community where Cuba and its politics were always present. At Brown, she had had the opportunity to focus her studies on the island to better understand its present state. Laura spent the spring 2019 semester in Havana with the Brown Casa Cuba program. On campus, she's a proud member of Alpha Chi Omega sorority and participated in the Brown Elementary after-school mentoring program. She is the incoming Stephen M. Rivers Fellow at the Center for Democracy in the Americas in Washington, D.C. Congratulations, where she will be working on US-Cuba policy to promote engagement and the normalization of relations between both countries. So I would like, I would like to remind that also Professor Maria Cabrera Aruz joined us today. So Maria was our co-good visiting professor at CLACS in the past fall semester. Danielle and Laura were students. Maria is a Cubanist, among others here at Brown. There is a fantastic group of Cubanists, Danielle Rodriguez, Professor Jennifer Lamb also, maybe she's online, and she was also one of the mentors of, Laura's mentors over the 4 years at Brown. So Laura now will be presenting her honors thesis on Cuban America, an oral history archive of young Cuban Americans in 2020. The thesis was supervised by Professor Esther Whitfield, and I was a second reader. Laura, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna share my screen with you all. So I have a short PowerPoint, and then I'm gonna actually show the website, which is the project itself. So like Danielle, I decided to do a creative project for my thesis. So I made a website, and in the website, there's an oral history archive of interviews with Cuban Americans. And so I really see the purpose of the project as a way to highlight the unique experiences and beliefs of today's young Cuban Americans in an oral history archive that's accessible in a website format, so anybody can access it at any time. And really to demonstrate the complexities and differences that exist within the Cuban American community in the US. And so this is a screenshot of the homepage of the website, which I'll show in a couple moments, the website itself, but it has different sections. So under the About the Project section, there's a page that's like a brief bio about myself. And then there's a page that's just for the reflective statement. So as a part of the creative project, we had to also write a paper essentially explaining like what our method was, why we chose this medium, and what the purpose of the project is. And so it explains everything I did in a lot of detail. And so that is available on the website for anybody to read. And then there's also the acknowledgements under that. Then there's a history of Cuban migration page, and then the oral history archive, which is the main part of the project. And so I wanted to include a history of Cuban migration page, and it basically breaks down the 5 main waves of Cuban migrations to the US from 1959 to the present. It gives like a brief description, and then it has photos of people actually migrating, and also photos of like newspaper clippings across the US reporting on this happening. And I really thought it was very important to ground these interviews in a history, in like a broader history of Cuban migrations to the US. If you listen to the interviews or if you read the transcriptions, you'll see that the moment in which either the interviewee or their family immigrated to the US really impacted the way that they were able to come to the US, the experiences that they had once they arrived here. And it also has influenced the ways that people think about Cuba, about the island, and the relationship if they have one to the island. And so the interviews page is the main part of the project. And this gives a brief description about each person's page. And if you click on the person's name, it takes you to like their own page, which I'll show now. And so I reached out to people, and they were able to choose where they wanted to be interviewed, and most interviews lasted about 40 minutes. I recorded them, and I asked them a lot of different questions, and these are like a sample of some of the questions I asked. So I would ask, like, when did your family immigrate to the US? That was usually the first thing I would ask. And how did they do so, and why did they decide to leave Cuba? And I also asked everybody whether or not they have a relationship to the islands or some kind of connection to it and what that looks like. And I was also really interested in finding out whether people's parents spoke to them about Cuba, about their lives on the islands at all, and what they would share, if anything. So these are some of the questions I asked, and then I would ask follow-up questions depending on the conversation that I was having with each person. And so in choosing my interviewees, I chose people who were first-generation immigrants or 1.5 generation. So first generation means that their parents immigrated to the US and then the person was born here or in another country, just outside of the island basically. And then 1.5 generation just refers to people who came when they were young, so as children basically. And then the target age was 18 to 25 years old. And I chose people who I already had relationships with for a variety of reasons, but I really felt that the questions I was asking were about a lot of sensitive topics, and I wanted to be able to ask these questions with people who I already had some kind of rapport with, so that there was already like a basic sense of trust that they had, and so that they would open up and actually share these stories. And I also would not feel comfortable asking these kinds of questions to somebody who I like did not know at all, because these are like people's very personal family stories. All three of my interviewees were raised in Miami, but born in different places. And I also was very intentional about choosing people who had 3 different kinds of immigration experiences. So these are my 3 interviewees: Melissa, Ignacio, and Barbara. So Melissa, her mom she went from Cuba to Peru, and from Peru, she came to Miami. And her extended family, who also has lived in the US since the 90s, came with the Balsero exodus of 1994. Ignacio's family actually went to Argentina first, and that's where he was born. And then in 2001, they immigrated to Miami, which is where he grew up and where his family has been ever since. And then Barbara's parents actually met and got married here in the US. Her father came in 1980. When Jimmy Carter announced that Cubans who wanted to immigrate to the US would receive refugee status here. And then her mom actually came in 1994 also as a balsera to Miami. And so now I'm going to show you all the website. So this is what it looks like. This is a photo of the Freedom Tower that's in Miami. It's now a museum, but it used to be in the early 60s a place where Cuban refugees would go and be like processed when they arrived in the US and receive like different kinds of government documents and things like that. And then there's a quote by Jose Marti, and then like my contact info. And so I want to show briefly the history page. So if you click on a photo, it comes out like larger. And so it's broken down into the 5 main waves of migration all the way until now. And then the list of sources so that people can read a little bit more if they would like. And then this is the main part of the project, which are the interviews themselves. So I'll show Melissa's page as an example. So every page has a person's name, a photo that they shared with me, and then a brief biography of themselves. So all the questions that I asked are in red, and I transcribed the interviews because I wanted people to be able to search by text for a specific word or phrase, so they could just go to that part of the interview. But then you can also hear the audio. So if you click this button, you'll be able to hear the answer for every question. And there's certain parts that are in a bigger font and they're in blue, and those are parts that I really found compelling and especially interesting, and so I wanted to highlight them. And so this is what an interview page looks like. And there's also other photos that interviewees shared with me. So she, for example, showed me photos of, or she allowed me to publish these photos from when she was young. And so this is what it looks like. I really thought it was very important to keep the unedited original audio clips, because when you listen to them, you can hear people's like hesitations, their pauses, you can hear their tone. And I think that that allows you to better understand how they're feeling besides just like the words that they're saying. That really gives you a sense of, you know, how they actually feel when they're answering a certain question, which I thought was very important. And then one of the challenges I had finding interviewees was finding people who would allow me to publish these things and use their real names and their photos, because I really wanted, I wanted the interviews to feel like personal and personalized, and I didn't want them to be anonymized, because I think in this way it really allows somebody who visits the website to connect more with the people whose stories are here. And so you can see, so all the pages are in the same format. And then Barbara's interview is really interesting because she actually went to Cuba, and so her photos that she shared with me are from her trip there in 2018. Yeah, and this project, you know, this is the beginning of the project. I would really like to continue this. I had a lot of fun doing my interviews. I like to ask a lot of questions, so I really enjoyed it. And I would also like to thank Professor Whitfield, Erika, Professor Maria Aranmayu, who was at Brown last semester, and all the other professors who have helped me all over the years. So thank you all so much.
Wait.
Oh.
Bravo. Okay. So, great, Laura. Muchas gracias también.
That class is done, so I have 2 classes that I'm dealing with now.
What? Hello? Okay. Bueno, vamos a, okay, let's continue. Vamos a seguir. So, Laura, I think that it would be great if you can also share in the chat, you know, the link to the blog, so everyone can have it, and then people can also keep it and visit the blog. So again, this was another great creative project that our honors students have completed, and also with a very strong, again, community engaged component, because as Laura said, I mean, this is a work in progress. Sorry. Hopefully, potentially, this blog will continue to be implemented with new life stories, with new testimonies. And in fact, I mean, yeah, it was like something we decided. I mean, I suggest Laura to publish also, like in the contact page of the blog, the possibility of for people to be in touch with her, and like following somehow the example of the Rhode Island Latino Oral History Project, to allow this blog to continue to grow progressively by collecting and transcribing other interviews, right? So for the people who just joined us, feel free to post your questions. There are many questions already, like scrolling down in the Q&A menu. So post your questions, and then at the end of the 2 remaining upcoming presentations, you will be able, I mean, the students will be able to answer all your questions. Now they are really the masters of their projects. They know them much better than any of us. So I'm sure they will, their answers will be like very relevant and satisfying. So now let me introduce you to Ella Satish, with another impressive project. This time, this is not like what we call a creative project format. This is a more like traditional research thesis in Latin American and Caribbean studies. We will remain in the area of Cuba and in this relationship between the US and Cuba. You will see how she will deal with this. So Ella is a first generation student concentrating in Latin American Caribbean studies only. She's a member of the Engaged Scholars Program, the ESP, and of Brown's program in liberal medical education. Ella spent fall 2018 in Cuba for a semester abroad and returned in January 2020 with a research grant to conduct ethnographic fieldwork for her thesis. This is the research grants, right, that our center provides our students in order to allow them to conduct research in the field. Ella enjoys working within the Providence community, mentoring in different schools around the city. And apart from teaching, she is a cervical cancer educator at Clinic Esperanza Hope Clinic here in Olneyville, Providence, a free clinic for the uninsured, and also provides medical interpretation for the women's clinic. Ella was recently accepted for a Fulbright Teaching Award in Colombia for next year, starting from January, and unfortunately, and as an exceptional student for the Brown, she was nominated, she received the title of Exceptional Student for the Brown Alumni Magazine June publication. So I'm very happy to introduce Ella's thesis, which is entitled Black Isn't the Risk Factor, Racism is: the Cuban Maternal Health System as a Model for Improving Care of Black Mothers in the United States. The thesis was advised by Professor Daniel Rodriguez again, and the second reader was Benjamin Brown of the medical school. I also would like to thank you. I see here Professor Timothy Emke, that everyone every year follows this event with great interest, and in addition is teaching this very successful course on the health of the Hispaniola that is very much attended by our concentrators. So thanks for this collaboration between public health, medical school, and our center. Ella, thanks.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. Let me just share my screen real quick. So, okay, so as Erika was saying, my thesis is an honors thesis. It's not a creative project. Black Isn't the Risk Factor, Racism is: the Cuban Maternal Health System as a Model for Improving Care of Black Mothers in the US. So first, here's a quick outline of my presentation. It kind of goes through my different chapters and also the methodology and the background of my presentation. And I wanted to start off first with a picture of my family. So this is from 2014, my sister's high school graduation. So something about my family is we all love kids. My mom loves to hold babies. Kids like to use my dad as a jungle gym. My sister studied international relations, but somehow ended up teaching. And I, as a lot of you know, teach at 3 schools in Providence. I love kids. I get emotional every time I see them. While my parents only decided to have 2 kids, everyone who is my friend knows that I want to have at least 4 to 5 kids. Another thing about my family, as you can see, is my dad is Black and my mom is white. So I identify as a Black woman with a multiracial heritage and a multicultural upbringing. And because I'm Black and my mom is white, I'm almost 4 times more likely to die from complications related to pregnancy than my mom. And not because she was pregnant over 20 years ago with my sister and I, but because she's white and I'm not. So here's some background. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from complications related to pregnancy than white women, as I was saying. And it's estimated up to 60% of these complications are completely preventable. Black maternal mortality is viewed as a human rights crisis that's plaguing the US. And even without focusing specifically on Black women, the US is still one of only 13 developed countries whose maternal mortality rate has not decreased in the past 25 years, despite monumental advances in medical technology. So in order to implement changes in US maternal health practices, the purpose of my thesis is to analyze the efficiency and efficacy of the Cuban maternal health program as a potential model to improve health outcomes and reduce disparities in care for Black mothers in the US. So I chose Cuba because of its world's renowned healthcare system, and also despite being a developed country, its rates of infant and maternal mortality rival wealthier nations such as the US, Canada, and European countries. My thesis addresses the gaps in scholarship surrounding racial dynamics in US maternal health care, and also combines research from US authors about Black maternal health, about the US and Cuban healthcare systems, and uses primarily Cuban resources, ethnographic fieldwork, so interviews and observations that I conducted in Cuba, as well as inquiries from other foreign authors. And unlike previous scholarship, it includes voices from Cubans working within their community, Cuban mothers who have been a part of this program, and also Black mothers and activists in the US. So my ethnographic fieldwork, my initial observations began in Cuba when I was abroad in fall 2018. And then I went back this past January 2020 to do follow-up observations and interviews, where I interviewed 2 epidemiologists, a family doctor, an OBGYN, and also 6 mothers. Their names are here: Ana Nidia, Jessica, Wendy, Raquel, Caridad, and Hope, about their experiences within the program. I did most of these interviews at Casa de las Americas, which is pictured here. It's the cultural institution in Cuba that sponsored my study abroad program and also my return. And then I did some of the interviews at medical offices. I went to some people's houses, and then some of them I did via WhatsApp for the convenience of mothers who, a lot of them had infants, and so they weren't going to be leaving the house. So here's some notable quotes from the mothers. One of them, the first one, Ana Nidia, she's talking about her perspective on the Cuban health system versus other maternal health care systems around the world. Caridad is talking about the best part of her pregnancy experience, and then Jessica is talking about the worst part of her pregnancy experience under the program. So my first chapter is an analysis of the Cuban program itself, the Cuban maternal health program. The program is known as El Programa Nacional de Atención Materno-Infantil, or PAMI for short. PAMI is the acronym. So I take 3 key aspects of the program for implementation in the US, and the first is a basis in primary care and preventative medicine. Prevention is a foundation of the Cuban health system as a whole, but is especially important for the maternal health system. I also discuss collaboration amongst different sectors of the medical community. So that's OBGYNs, family doctors, nurses, dentists, social workers, all working together to holistically support patients, which brings me to my third point. So that's supporting patients from a medical standpoint, but also a psychosocial standpoint. And the hogar materno, or the maternal home, is sort of the embodiment of these 3 practices. It includes prevention, collaboration, and support of patients on an in and outpatient basis. Mothers can go for things as simple as diagnostic testing, or they can be admitted for long periods of overnight stay if they don't have the resources in their home to support them during the pregnancy, for example. So my second chapter, second section, builds upon my first chapter's outline of the program and uses Cuba's successful reduction in its C-section rate as a case study for the efficacy of the program, and highlights its potential for success within the US. So let me explain a little bit as to why the C-section and C-section rates are so important. The overuse of the cesarean procedure is a global issue that began at the end of the 20th century, so in the 70s, 80s. The World Health Organization recommends a C-section rate of between 5% and 15%. So anything below 5% means the country doesn't have enough resources to offer C-section as an option to its mothers. And anything above 15 means usually these C-sections weren't medically necessary. So in the US, Black women are the demographic with the highest C-section rate. And in 2017, in general, the C-section rate for the US was about 1/3 of all births. But actually from hospital to hospital across the country, the rates could range from 11% to 60% and upwards of 70% according to some statistics. Whereas in Cuba, the C-section rate for 2017 was 18.3% of all births. And this was a decrease of about half from the late 90s. And so the drivers for C-sections are sort of different in Cuba versus the US. We usually think in the US of the drivers are sort of like monetary incentive. So doctors get paid double the amount for a cesarean birth versus a vaginal birth. And also another driver is time. So in the US, we can schedule a C-section, you know how long it's gonna take, you know what day it's gonna be on, whereas a vaginal labor is longer, you don't necessarily know it's gonna be, there's a little bit more of unpredictability. So Cuba took 3 steps to reduce their C-section rate. The first was to eliminate C-sections due to sociological causes or non-medical issues. So that's something like a woman asking for a C-section, so an elective C-section. The second is reducing cesareans performed because of non-obstetric indicators. So that's anything that has to do with some sort of medical condition unrelated to the pregnancy itself. So that could be high blood pressure affecting the pregnancy and causing the need for a C-section that wouldn't have necessarily been necessary in the first place. And the third is controlling and maintaining protocols for the most common obstetric indicators. So a common obstetric indicator would be triplets. A lot of times a mother is going to give birth via C-section if they're having triplets. And what's important about the cesarean reduction in Cuba is that these changes were only possible because of the strong foundation of prevention, collaboration, holistic support that are part of the PAMI or the program. And that's why they were able to have this sharp reduction in sort of like a very short time period. So my next section, or my third chapter, talks about Black maternal health, and I want to start off with some statistics. So between 700 and 900 maternal deaths and over 50 100,000 preventable near deaths occur each year in the US, and a grossly disproportionate number of these are Black women. I look at maternal health through the framework of reproductive and birth justice, which are terms coined by the Black Mamas Matter Alliance. So reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have your experiences centered in healthcare, and to also analyze the power systems in place that affect your health. I address implicit bias in healthcare, which has an adverse effect on Black women and other women of color. And we kind of see that, if I don't know if you've seen in the media, in the cases of Serena Williams and Beyonce Knowles and their pregnancy experiences that kind of came out in 2018, 2017. I also talk about weathering, which is the toxic physiological stress caused by systemic racism on the bodies of Black women. So it causes things like high blood pressure and other chronic conditions that can adversely affect a pregnancy and also affect the infant. So here's some interventions that are kind of based off of the Cuban system and also Black maternal health activists themselves in the US. So the first is access to quality care for Black mothers. So not only can a mother get to a medical appointment, has access to medical care, but it's of a high quality and of the same quality standardized across the nation. This care is community-based and holistic in nature. So providers have an understanding of the experiences of mothers when they come to receive their care. And they're supported both in a medical sense and a psychosocial sense. And community-based doulas are sort of a specific agent of change to implement these interventions. A doula is originated from the Black midwife figure, the historic Black midwife figure in the rural South, but they've become inaccessible and underutilized in the Black community. So what a doula does is kind of provide support in every aspect of the pregnancy. They'll go to appointments, they'll provide education for mothers on things like breastfeeding and breathing during labor. They'll also be there for the birth process. And so the doula has been cited as sort of the way to implement these interventions on a larger scale. So Black women-led initiatives are also very important in Black maternal health activism. So the first thing that these organizations do is listening to Black women's needs and centering their experiences. A lot of these initiatives, like I was saying, are already in place. So there are a lot of organizations popping up around the country who do this work, but Cuba can act as sort of a systemic and intentional model from which we can create sort of federal reform surrounding Black maternal health. In Providence, we see two organizations specifically that I talked to for this presentation and for my thesis, Umojanía and Sistafaya. Umojanía is a collective of birth workers or doulas who was started by Q Osorio, who's a woman, she's a doula, she created this grassroots organization. Sistafaya is another grassroots organization staffed by women of color that aims to build community and solidarity surrounding maternal health in Providence and the greater Rhode Island area. So Black mothers are the only people that can interpret their experiences and find for themselves which forms of care, support, and align with these experiences, and it's up to providers in the medical system to shape their care sort of around these experiences. And so on power structures and healthcare autonomy and liberation, we can't address healthcare as an institution without also analyzing the systems of power in place that uphold it as an institution. And maternal healthcare reform for the US can be a driving force for amending the failures of the healthcare system by starting fresh as a whole. And foreign collaboration with countries like Cuba, Spain, other countries that have more success in things like maternal healthcare can play a critical role in this reform. And focusing on and centering the most marginalized will not only uplift these communities, but it will result in improved care for communities as a whole across the nation. That is my presentation. Thank you all for listening. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Ella, for sharing with us these very impressive results. I think, I mean, this is like a brave research also, since like Ella is not only comparing like two healthcare systems in the context of pregnancy and pregnancy risks also, but in addition, she's actually proposing policies and also proposing the fact that the Cuban maternal program can in fact be become, right, a model for the US in order to reduce Black women, pregnant women mortality, and also infant mortality. So this was like, and in order to be able to suggest these policies, you can imagine, I mean, the amount of research that is behind the interviews indeed that she conducted with patients and healthcare workers in Cuba are like very original and new materials. It's like in the case of Laura, no? The importance of the interviews that they conduct is not only like to add an appendix at the end of the thesis, but these interviews are part of the research, and they become actually like a corpus data that they are analyzing in the projects. So, and in the case of Ella, as in the case of Laura, I would say we will see now for Elisabeth, and the same for Danielle, you see also this very interesting trajectory of the students. So the beginning, there is something that is a personal history of migration, a personal history of related, as Ella explained, to I'm Black, and I feel that I am more exposed to the risk of dying in the moment in which I will give birth. In the case of Danielle, his passion for Latin American history and teaching, we'll see now with Elisabeth. So as you can see, like the trajectory between personal life and then how this becomes research, how they develop it in a creative way, and this challenging academic product that will remain for us. And hopefully all these works, I wish they will somehow achieve, become like papers and publications, and not only remain in the Brown digital repository, right? This is why we conduct research and we form like these young scholars. So now, thank you so much. Now, Elisabeth Schifrin, so a new challenging creative project, which in this case consists in the production of a film, of a documentary film. So let me first tell you a few words about Elisabeth. Elisabeth is a double concentrator in Latin American Caribbean Studies and Modern Culture and Media, MCM. She comes from Montclair, New Jersey. And so the two areas of, can you hear me? Yeah. The two areas of focus, Latin American Caribbean Studies and Modern and then MCM, converge in an honors thesis film, a self-critiquing documentary that aims to expose the narrative conventions that shape Western audiences' understanding of indigenous people of the Amazon. Elisabeth's early passion for learning languages, as well as her connection to a late Peruvian grandmother, who was a middle school Spanish teacher, motivated her studies of Spanish throughout high school and then at Brown. In the summer, after her sophomore year, Elisabeth interned in the Peruvian Amazon as the videographer of Alianza Arcana, a grassroots organization that supports indigenous Shipibo people and their efforts to conserve their environment. In her junior year, Elisabeth studied at Casa de las Americas and La Universidad de La Habana, again, in La Habana, in Cuba, with Brown Casas program. Outside of class, Elisabeth was the director of photography for Brown Motion Pictures' first bilingual film, Siempre Sale el Tren. Her thesis is entitled Proof of Life, which is the title of the documentary itself, Creative Thesis Project Reflection. The research and the actual making of the documentary was supervised by Professor Ramel Ross in the visual art department, and I was the second reader of a great project. I hope that you will be sharing with us maybe a short excerpt from the movie. Great, thank you so much, Elisabeth, please.
Thank you, Erika. I'm going to share my screen now. And thank you all for being here this morning. Okay. Can you see this? Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. This is called Proof of Life, a decolonizing look at life in the Shipibo Amazonian community of Santa Clara. And my thesis is a film, and what I've prepared to talk about today is my reflection on this film. And I will show a short snippet of it later on. So some terms that are important to understand this thesis are the Western imaginary. So the Western imaginary is the way that popular media and culture have led people in the US and Europe and Canada and to think about other places in the world. So I'm specifically approaching the way that people have been taught through movies and TV to think about indigenous people in the Amazon. And there is a long lineage of ethnographic film that fuels this imaginary. And in this ethnographic film, there's lots of conventions used, such as personal testimony, as seen in interviews, and kind of large generalizing summations of this is what life is like in this place over there. And documentaries tend to try to claim that they're telling the truth about the way that life is in another place. And narrative construction. So the idea of constructing narrative, I was wrestling with in my internship that Erika mentioned. So when I worked as a videographer at this NGO in the Peruvian Amazon, while I supported the goals of the NGO, I felt that the way that we were creating content, I and my colleagues, was tailored towards certain messages that fueled this Western imaginary of indigenous people. And in our interviews, I found that we were using something that my advisor, Ramel Ross, calls documentary ventriloquism, which is when the interviewer is sort of feeding lines behind the camera to the interviewee. And also I met a lot of people when I was down there, a lot of travelers who came to the Amazon with ideas, with misguided ideas about what the Amazon was. And because these travelers came from places of power, they actually had the ability to inflict a lot of harm on people in the Amazon. So for example, this Canadian man that I met started an NGO that ended up in a lot of land, a lot of forestry burning down, even though he came with good intentions, I guess. And there's also currently a wave of tourism growing in communities surrounding the city of Pucallpa, which is one of the largest cities in the Amazon where I was living during my internship. And there's a potential for this tourism to either be helpful in sustaining their economic growth or to be harmful if people come in with misinformed ideologies and if Westerners come in with that. So during my internship, I felt a lot of responsibility in representing vulnerable peoples through audio and visual means, and bringing this representation back to a university setting to show people like you who are in positions of power, and I felt a responsibility as a sort of messenger of the people of this community in Santa Clara. So I decided to do a documentary because not only because I'm also a film major, but also because I believe that in order to make socio-political change towards justice and to make progressive changes, that I believe that culture is kind of the strongest medium to influence those changes, and film and TV is the way that people consume culture the most often now, and I think the most readily dispersed medium. Okay, so this community, Santa Clara, is an hour away from the city by taxi, and many years ago, it was deforested by illegal logging, and they're currently they're currently leading efforts to reforest their community. And because they are so close to the city, there's a lot of anxiety around their loss of culture and about the younger generation's desire to become more mestizo in the way that they dress and the music they listen to. So there's this conception of the past as this kind of idyllic, like, time when the forest was abundant and they could get their food and medicine from nature and they were self-sustaining. And then there's this optimism towards the future in their reforestation efforts, that they can return to this self-sustaining way of life by bringing back their plant biodiversity and by preserving culture in the future generations. But currently, they are longing for both the past and the future, and feel disillusioned in the present because they are facing economic issues, because they can no longer sustain themselves, but rather have to rely on trading with the city to be alive. So my intentions with the film were to undermine the truth-telling authority of documentary. So I wanted people to think about why we believe that documentaries are always telling us the truth, and the fact that documentaries can only portray a fragment of the complexity of a place, specifically ethnographic film that tries to present a portrait of life in a certain place and of a certain group of people. I also wanted full transparency with the community, so I was in full communication over Facebook Messenger with the people in the community that I had become friends with during my internship when I was working with them. And I told them my ideas for the project, and I wouldn't have gone forth with it if they weren't on board, but they saw opportunity to be connected to potential, to people who could potentially support them financially in their current situation. So, I brought together archival footage from old films such as Beyond the Andes, which is a 1954 film, and Fitzcarraldo, which is a fictional film about the Amazon. And I combined those with my footage from 2018 when I was making content that was oriented towards the goals of the NGO. And I made a recent trip in January of 2018 to get footage specifically for this project. So I combined those three types of footage, and I'm going to share a small snippet of the film now. How am I doing on time? Okay.
Maybe Elisabeth, three minutes left.
Okay, I'll show a small clip then. Okay.
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Freddy Valles Brito. Soy natural de este pueblo, Chipiva, Santa Clara de Yarinacocha. Mi nombre en Shipibo es Ununzu. Mi nombre en Shipibo me dio mi abuelo, mi tatarabuelo.
Está bien. Ya, pausa. Estás muy bien. Sí, imagínate que me estás contando, y es la verdad, ¿no? Nos estamos conociendo recién, y me estás contando, sí, mi nombre en Shipio me dio... Porque como estás con el micro ahí, no te esfuerces tampoco en... Ahí todo se va a registrar, ¿no? Tranquilas, mi nombre En Shipibo me lo vio mi abuelo, que es tatarabuelo. Esto.
Yo no sé, no recuerdo mi nombre.
Ay.
No sé qué con el otro. Más fácil.
Pero
Yeah.
puedes decir. Okay. So in that, I hope that you could see that I was reaching back into footage I had from the NGO when, we had made this guy Freddy put on jewelry and a traditional vest when he was wearing just a t-shirt in order to conduct this interview. And there was what I described before as documentary ventriloquism happening there. So some of the difficulties I ran up against was navigating my neo-colonial presence in this community as an outsider, and being mindful that I was filming everything and bringing my ideologies from my upbringing into a fairly insular community. And a lot of this manifested for me when I was worrying about when it was appropriate to take out the camera or film someone. So I only filmed people that I already had a relationship with, and after talking to them, and after asking for consent as well. So I had a lot of ethical dilemmas in my process about whether this would be beneficial or whether it could be harmful, and for the community of Santa Clara. And I wanted to maintain collaboration and full transparency with the community throughout the experience. So I split the film into 3 parts. The first one is La Cicatriz, the second one, the scar, the second one is El Ojo, or the eye, and the third one is El Incendio, or the fire, in which I have footage of a fire from an unknown source that was sweeping across from like behind the community. And they said that happens 3 to 4 times a year, that their land gets set on fire and they don't know who is doing it, but they all gather buckets and start like throwing water on the fire. And I felt that this was an important moment to show them being actively defending their land when the government was neglecting to protect them properly, and asserting their political status and legitimacy in the country despite government neglect and corporate like destruction of their environment. So other things that I filmed were the election of the new leader of the community, use of technology in the community, and my positionality as an outsider is very present throughout the film in order to communicate that that this is a narrative coming out of me, and that the audience should keep that in mind while they're watching, that this is my view of something, and I'm not trying to tell a story about the people of Santa Clara, but I'm rather just trying to offer an opportunity to connect by witnessing things happening in Santa Clara, witnessing moments while maintaining an understanding that you are watching from your vantage point, from a different status and identity and backgrounds of experience. And I believe that is a certain alternative to empathy, but rather an understanding while maintaining your separate identity. And I think that type of understanding can help to change ideology for the future and reduce harm to communities that are misrepresented or underrepresented or don't typically have the power to represent themselves. So
Thank you.
I will close it off there.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth.
Hello.
Thank you very much for sharing with us a minute of the film that we really hope to show soon at CLACS. Maybe once everyone will be back on campus. This can be a nice way of opening our new season of events one day, hopefully. And yeah, so what we saw here again is like the very high top of the iceberg of this very mature and deep research that Elisabeth has been conducting for a long time by living in this community and collecting all these stories, and then find a way, which is I think the most like important challenge of the research, find a way somehow to recount, right? This story and the isolation of this community by somehow also criticizing the way in which documentaries and ethnographic documentaries are usually used by filmmakers, like either to, as Ramel Ross that now joined us, thank you Ramel for joining the event, and as you call like this ventriloquism while filming documentaries, or extractivism also we could say in this case. And then Elisabeth did exactly the opposite, right? By trying to remain, like keep the right distance, and at the same time holding all these projects with great responsibility and commitment in terms of with social justice issues experienced by this community. So we have concluded like this part of the presentations that our students had conducted, and now I think that I will ask my friend and colleague Kate Goldman to somehow share with us some of the questions. There are many questions that have been shared like all the time. You can see them, maybe you have already seen them scrolling in the chat. So maybe Kate, if you can select one or two for each student, and then I will ask our students. We have 10 minutes left. We may maybe overshoot and go like maybe 15 minutes instead of 10, so that everyone can have the possibility to respond, and we can continue to celebrate your great efforts.
So I think we'll go back to Daniel Jason for the first question, and it's from Professor Empke. He asked if the students suggested subjects and material that they wanted you to cover that you had not considered.
The short answer is yes, they did. And so while I didn't think about covering it at the time, I adapted my syllabus and my lesson plans to fit different subjects, but the majority of them were things that I didn't think that were very modern and that just came out, or things that were, you know, general American things that we hear on the news, but that I didn't think of could be taken in a very Latin American setting. So I mean, there were some things that I didn't plan for, like the news of the detention camps, and this was just when all of that was starting to come out. So that was a very hot topic that I adjusted to talk about. There was also other things that had been heard for a while, but you know, I didn't put it together. Like, for example, a bunch of students wanted to talk about abortion and how the Latin American community is dealing with that and their perspectives. Something that I thought that, I mean, while I knew that there was a connection there, I didn't think that it was, I didn't realize that like the Latino community had so much to say about it. It's always that they're grouped in with a bunch of other subjects and sections.
Thank you, Daniel. The next question is, I'm sorry, Professor Emke, did you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for answering the question.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Great. Laura Muñoz was our next presenter, and the question for her comes from Professor Rodriguez, who says that he's excited to see that you're planning on adding to your project moving forward, and is asking, how do you see it evolving?
Yeah, so I would really like to interview people not from Miami and include them as well. And I think that that's very important going forward. But I really want to do the interviews in person, which is why I wasn't able to do that in like the short time frame I had to finish the thesis. But yeah, people not from Miami, include people who have other kinds of immigration stories. I think like longer term, I would like to include people who came to the US when they were a little bit older, like at least 10 or older, you know, when you already have like actual memories of like being in Cuba and growing up there and exploring what that's like. And also, yeah.
Fantastic. The third presentation was from Satish, and the question comes from Steve Bloomfield, who's the Associate Director of the Watson Institute, one of our partners at Brown. And the question is, did you discover any locations in the US from which practitioners and mothers might be able to take some positive lessons from the health and care of Black mothers?
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. So in our local community, the two organizations I was talking about, Homogenea and Sister Fire, were Providence-based ones. There's also a whole doula collective in DC. There's organizations in Oakland, Oklahoma City. You see them the most in kind of like major city centers is where I would say that are at least like the most accessible and the most publicized, and the ones that I found personally.
Thank you, Ella. And the last presenter was Elisabeth. And the question comes from Erika, who is asking how the documentary was received in the community where you were doing your work.
That's a great question. So I am still refining it before I send it over, but I am anticipating that they will have a very a unique reception of it, because I left certain parts of it in Shipibo untranslated, and those parts won't be understood by English or Spanish speaking viewers, but will be understood by the community of Santa Clara when they view it. So I am seeing the film as a kind of place of encounter where where the viewer of the film brings to it their backgrounds and their vantage point from which they're seeing the film. And that is just as important to their experience of the film as the way that I produced it and put it out there. So I've been in communication with them over Facebook Messenger, and I'm working to touch up a few things before I send it out, and I'll let you know when I hear back from them. Thank you for your question.
And I think we have time for another round. Another question that came from Steve Bloomfield, this one is for Daniel, and he's asking, what did you learn from your students about the duality of Latinx US identity that you didn't already know?
That is a good question. So something I learned, I learned two things. So the one thing that I think like really stuck with me is just like how no two experiences are the same. And I know, and I say that only because like after 4 years of studying at Brown, you know, sometimes your focus gets really narrowed, and you only think that, oh, this is like, this population is the only experience, and the only experience that's out there. And then the the teaching and like, you know, realizing that no, this is how that every person, every Latinx person has such a different experience in the United States system, and or it just in the United States in general. It just really opened my eyes to just like how deep being Latino or Latinx in the United States is. The main point was that like different, that, you know, as much as like we were similar, we were also different. And that my experience as, you know, Chilean American in Texas was, while in some cases very similar, other cases extremely different from, you know, a Mexican or Honduran immigrant, Mexican immigrant from living in Providence, or a you know, first generation or second generation immigrant. I just realized how it kind of just reinforced the idea that, you know, no two experiences being part of the Latinx community in the United States are the same.
Thank you, Daniel. Laura, could you talk a little bit more about your choice of the blog as a platform? Was that your initial idea, or were you thinking about other options for that, for the vehicle for delivering your research?
Yeah, it was my first choice. I thought a website was the easiest way to create something that was very accessible to people. You know, it's very easy to access if I can send the link to, and I can send the link to a bunch of people at the same time. And so to reach a wider audience, and also a website is very easy to edit and add to over time. So like I mentioned during my presentation, this is something I would like to continue doing. I really enjoy collecting the stories. And so in this way, I would be able to do that and continue adding to it over time. Thank you for your question.
Next, we're going to go back to Ella. And the question comes from Professor Rodriguez, who's asking if you could speak more about whether the Cuban system might also learn something from the kinds of patient-centered care that radical Black doulas are doing here.
Yeah, this is a complicated question. Definitely is the answer. So there's kind of like a little historical component. So when Fidel said that like todos somos iguales, kind of race became denied as a salient issue in Cuba because like you couldn't talk about it, wasn't something you can talk about. And so the sort of thing that we see with Black doulas, where they center the patient experiences and how their experiences shape their healthcare for themselves, and that sort of individualism is something that the Cuban healthcare system can definitely take into account. And that's actually what mothers were saying to me in their interviews. They felt like sometimes they were being treated as if they were all equal, and as if all of their experiences were the same, which they're not. They kind of noted it as sort of a tabla, that the providers had this checklist that they had to go down, and they had to do it all. And despite any differences that they had bringing to the table, that kind of was not really acknowledged in the same way as we see with doula care in the US, which focuses and centers that patient experience in a way that is different than in Cuba.
Okay, and our last question is for Elisabeth. And it's actually not, it comes from a comment instead of a question, but I'm going to turn it into a question. I think this comes from Maria Cabrera Ruz, who said that your project might change the way that she watches documentaries. And my question is if it has changed the way that you watch documentaries.
Yes, I definitely. I think that I've been in the process of transforming the way I look at documentaries since I watched El Velador, which is Natalia Almada's documentary, in my sophomore year in a class called The Art of Revolution in Latin America. And before I did my internship, I had a lot of questions about the ethics of documentary filmmaking, and whether there was an ethical way to represent vulnerable people from an outsider perspective on screen. And these questions were kind of plaguing me for like 2 years. And I think that going through the experience of creating a documentary myself was the best way for me to look at why people trust documentaries as conveyors of truth so much, and I now am very skeptical when I watch documentaries, and looking for the ways that narrative is constructed. But also I think I realized that documentary is not just a conveyor of truth, but I like to frame it as, I guess, a view of the real fictions that we live, that we enact in our everyday lives. We live in our own fictions and our shared realities, which, who's to say what is real? And yeah, so I think I've softened my borders between fiction and nonfiction, and my borders between like pure ethics and unethical conventions, and I found that there's a lot more complexity there. Yeah.
So I think that we have reached somehow the threshold of our time, and I would like to say thank you again to all of our, first of all, attendees. I hope that somehow these presentations of our honor students have also brought some, I don't know, some new, different thoughts in your houses in these moments, in which it's very difficult also to somehow be able to think about something else. And this is very refreshing for once, and is bringing the joy that and this feeling of congratulation, satisfaction, appreciation, all these positive things that at the moment we are not feeling that much. So thank you to all the advisors and second readers. So I would like particularly to thank you, Daniel Rodriguez, again and again. Same, Esther Whitfield. Daniel Rodriguez, I say twice because he's the supervisor of, the advisor of 2 theses. Esther Whitfield from Comparative Literature, Veronica Ingham from Development Studies, Benjamin Brown from the Medical School, Ramel Ross from the Visual Art Department, and I know that these honors theses are not only a great moment for the student while they're doing them, and also when they are finally done and they're presenting and sharing them with the community, but these are also great opportunities for us as professors and for the Center for Latin American Studies to get to know new colleagues and to establish like new collaborations, new opportunities for future students, for future courses, future events, future grants, who knows. And also to consolidate previous and ongoing collaborations like with Daniel Rodriguez or Professor Empke here from Public Health. You know that our center is completely interdisciplinary, truly interdisciplinary, and as you can see, different kind of projects and fields, disciplines within like this geographical focus that is Latin America can definitely find their space in CLACS. So hopefully we will continue like our mission, forming like new young scholars, brilliant as Danielle, Laura, Ella, and Elisabeth, that we congratulate once again, and we wish you all the best for all your career out of Brown, and the future. Just continue to surprise us and keep us informed as well. So felicidades a todos, congratulations.